And recording is in progress. Very good. So I'll start off with this quiz, and just stop me if you want me to change pace or do anything else. Mhm. Okay, do you see this behavior design fundamentals? No. You do.
Now it's there.
Yeah.
You can see it now.
Oh.
All right.
Mm.
Let me try again. Yeah. Share number 2. Doesn't show me a green preview. Do you see it now?
You
Yep.
can see it. Yeah.
All right.
Waiting for it to go full screen though.
Right.
It's a bit like in progress. Yeah, now it's full screen. All's good.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you for that feedback. Quick tech check. Hope everything's in place, especially your headphones, your visuals. Again, I think it's a good point to kind of gather up some writing material. If you want to note points, because really this class is a lot about just surfacing things that you want to talk about and just doing it in whatever order you feel like. And it's still called Designing Nudges, but really, I think slightly inappropriate title. You could call it Designing Nudges Part 1, and Part 2 will be where we get into doing some active work. So this is class 10, and we do have 2 more classes where there is definitely some theory. One of them looks at personality. That's the next one, diversity, individual differences, or INDD in short. That's why the channel in Slack is called Personality and INDD. We're looking at things like gender, cultural diversity, very important stuff. And then finally, we look at scaling, the science of it, experimentation, data science. We kind of touched upon that a little bit in one of the classes. It was gamification, right? Yeah. So behavioral AI, behavioral data science. It's a lot of interesting, some really interesting stuff happening there. So, but those 2 are so much more like we've gone past the theory, except for personality, which is a core psychological theory, which we touch, or a core psychology domain, let's say, which we touch in week 11. I don't want to preempt what the content here should be. I know what I have the conception and the theoretical content in place, but I want to kind of massage it as much as possible to understand what your learning needs are. And so that's why I want to take this class to actually get that feedback from you. And just through discussion, I think we'll be able to surface a lot of those learning needs. And potentially we will still have a Designing Nudges class after this. So basically you end up getting 13 classes instead of 12. I hope that's okay. More is more, right, when it comes to learning. So if it's totally like running past your schedule and stuff like that, we can find a way to schedule that extra class also at a time that works for you all. I'll just try to find you. I can't see your. I hate it when I can't see you guys. Yes, good. Okay, sweet. Yes, I can see everybody. Yeah, so heading on, just jump in if you feel like it. But we'll do a pop quiz today. We'll try to review all the lessons. We'll try to have a reflective discussion and then kind of co-create these classes going ahead. Pretty much all the elements apply today because we are going through everything. It's ambitious, but let's see how far we get. So just a bunch of teaser questions to start getting you guys, just like activate you guys and think about, yeah, which symbol stands for which. Does anyone want to take this, or even multiple people?
I know I
I'll
could
give it a
start.
shot.
Okay, see.
It's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Hey Tom, let's do it together. I challenge
Yes.
Tom to do it together. Okay, Tom, let's go one by one. You start with first one.
Nice.
Behavioral economics.
Yes.
Super. The neuroscience scientific bit, the second one.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if it was
And
neuroscience though
It is neuroscience. Yes.
anymore.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I'm not sure about this one. Was it cognitive psychology or something like that?
It was cognitive. Yes.
So the next one is social. Something with social.
Anybody
Social
else?
sciences. Sorry.
The fourth one.
Sociocultural.
Yes.
Sociocultural. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Sociocultural. I think that's important to remember the other half of that word as well. Like it's the beyond the individual societies, groups, their behavior. Very good.
Mm.
And then finally,
Computational.
nice computation.
Was there something else to that except just computational, or?
I just called it computational. And actually in the field, you'll see some hybrids or some, you might find terms like, for example, cognitive, could be called cognitive something in the field sometimes in literature and on white papers. But I think these are the simplest blocks that you can think about them as. Also, if it helps to think about them, you can think of, behavioral economics being the very basic thing which looks at things like loss and cost and benefit, and it's very transactional, very, very utility maximization oriented. And the neuroscience is slightly bigger. It's quite big actually, but it's entirely almost based in the individual, right? It's talking about the individual's capability and the capacity that we have looking at the brain, the neurons, and all of this stuff. And then it opens out a bit more and you start looking at the interaction of the world and the environment, the brain and the environment, or the human and the environment. And that's why the feedback loop of cognitive thinking becomes very interesting, because when you're thinking about it from a cognitive perspective, you're also thinking about the world. And it's got that iterative or recursive sort of a quality to it. And then you looking at what happens when people are doing things and thinking in groups, and that's the social cultural lens. And then finally, when you take all of that data, translate it into massive amounts of data at scale, you start getting into a computational party. So that helps. And I think it's kind of useful to spot which is which, because you'll start seeing how the ones in behavioral science are related to each other, and how the other ones are, how concepts in the others are related to each other. So I think it builds a very structured understanding for you over time. Great.
Yeah, I really like that structure.
Great.
All just layered like that.
Thanks. So yeah, this author, Erving Goffman, which was his well-known book that we discussed briefly. Or what topic do you remember without Googling him? It's okay.
You know us too well.
You guys, we're all like multitaskers, so I guess you do it almost with your system one, almost like you wouldn't even think about
Google.
Well, by the way, I put together these questions to almost also tell you that if more than half these questions roughly are, you know the answers, or you know roughly the answers to them, then you could say your memory of all that you've done is decent. But if it's below half, then just that would be a note of self to you to say, okay, you need to probably watch it all again. Which I know you will do over time. I'm not trying to push you towards anything, but it's just also sort of a way to self-check. Honestly, I had to look at the lessons again to see exactly what happened in what. I know the concepts, but I forgot also which know exactly which was organized where, because I'm doing this the first time. But anyways, this author, Irving Goffman, is one of the great pioneering sociologists, and he came up with frame analysis, early work on framing. He is a critical thinker when it comes to things like identity in social contexts, and therefore framing as how do you frame the interaction or the value of interactions between people. And his first book was called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And it's kind of like, it's super good stuff already in the 50s, I think, where he talks about how we present ourselves in everyday life. And it gave rise to his later work called Framing. And he did research in all kinds of interesting situations, like asylums and so on, to figure out how people present themselves. And I think it's still very valuable, very difficult to read guide though. So this is like the high end of the complex stuff. It's 50 years ago, they didn't have that much necessity to be pop. Nowadays, I think the books are really written to be simple, but 50 years ago, they didn't really care. It's very poetic almost. And so it's hard to understand, but and it's not very structured, but I think it's really, this is the kind of stuff you should be reading if you want to get into the thick of it. Really. Great. Which of the following is not a recognized principle of choice architecture? So all of these are recognized in the industry to be principles of choice architecture. One of them is not.
Opt out. It seems like some kind of solution. No?
Yeah. I would also
Interesting.
say so.
Interesting. Yes. Any other thoughts? I'm not saying that's wrong.
I thought maybe give feedback because that's after the choice has already been made.
Interesting. Wow. Yes. Great point. Well, actually, it is easy.
Yeah, my vote.
Sorry,
Okay.
Jamie, go for it. No, just say what you're going to say in any case, please.
I was also gonna say, I guess the vote was also for feedback. I mean, it's like a couple of these are kind of like shaky. Seems giving feedback or ease of opting out. Because feedback would, like we were saying, was after the fact, and opting out, if it's a choice has, you can something that's forced or is not. What wasn't that part of it? Something of freedom to make the choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, but I mean, in social science and in behavioral science, everything isn't. There are no clear demarcations between things, and I think this question is also just to make you aware and tickle you about how hard it is to draw the boundaries. So I'll explain this answer a little bit. The recognized principles of choice architecture from the book Nudges and from the white paper, and if you go to a behavioral economics like consultancy website or a kind of an expert website, would be broken down by the acronym NUDGES, NUDGES. There's a principle for each of those letters, which we touched in a lesson. And the N stands incentives, is where N comes in. It's the N that's highlighted there. U is actually understand mappings. G, NUD, sorry, D is defaults, which is probably the most well-known kind of principle, like make the default option the best option. NUDG is give feedback. E is actually enable or expect error. That's the one I left out. And S is structure complex choices. So I left out expect error and I added ease of opt out, which is a little bit more of a we covered it as one of the ethical guidelines or one of the checklist of ethics for nudging. So is ease of opt-out not a nudge? No, it could still be a nudge. It could still be applied as a nudge. Like Sia correctly identified, it could be still thought of as a sort of design principle. But these are kind of like the canonical NUDGES with expect error would be the canonical, principles of choice architecture. And actually, they're really quite a strong set of 6, because if you think of them, you already can cover a lot of ground when designing nudges. Great. What does this graphic refer to?
Loss aversion.
Loss aversion, Iris, very good answer. Not exactly the answer I'm looking for, but it definitely is.
Encore. Is it something like encore effect?
Anchoring effect also, absolutely. Do you remember what larger umbrella term or theory this represents, from which all these principles of loss aversion, anchoring effect, all of these things were derived from the theory?
So decision making, isn't it? Or is it too high level?
Decision making would be, it is absolutely about decision making, but that it's not, it's a theory of decision making, but it's not the name of the theory itself. We covered this also in a particular class. It's the one that Daniel Kahneman came up with, the legendary theory, which has created behavioral economics, pretty much. Okay, it's called prospect theory. Kind of, that was the name of the white paper. And the reason it's called that is because it's trying to understand how we agents prospect for value when we are faced with choices in information unequal situations, whether there's imperfect information, which is most of life, right? Until then, economics treated everything. Economics was based on the premise that all human decision making was happening with perfect information, but actually we never have perfect information, or very rarely have perfect information. So we've got to rely on biases, we've got to rely on heuristics. And we also are subject to all these kinds of effects, like we perceive losses of equal size to be more, we perceive them as greater than gains of equal size. Losing 500 euros seems to be more painful than gaining 500 euros. So it depends on how you frame it. So you get an understanding of how to use frames there. You also can anchor and say, well, the middle price, the middle coffee is 7 euros. And based on that, people will judge two other coffees placed side by side and their prices, because they look at what do I choose to lose? So you can, if you price one at 3 euros and price one at 7 euros, it's clear that people will probably go for the large and small. But if you price one at 6 in the middle, you increase the chances of people picking the 7 euro coffee, because they perceive that as a gain. Like, why don't I just pay 1 more euro and get a large, double the size of the middle? So that's anchoring that's working there. Or the first price you introduce, sometimes depending on if you walk into a store, the first thing you see can be an anchor and so on. So all of these principles came out of this theory called prospect theory. And whenever you're referring to, anyone says prospect theory, that's the key graphic that you're looking at and everything around it. Also not the easiest answer, of course. It's not the widest known, let's say. But behavioral economics will talk about it all. Economists will talk about it all the time. So we perceive value from a random reference point. These are from the slides from a lesson. And we're also less sensitive to increasing gains, right? We find a very random reference point because we have incomplete information. we have to choose some reference point from where to make decisions, and it's usually random. It's based on some bias, some almost certain cognitive error. Anyways, fascinating paper and work. Great. And also, if you guys want to talk about anything a little bit more, just stop me. Taylor, guy who wrote the book Nudge, Richard Taylor, he came up with the word snudge for self-nudging. Do you remember what is the term that he used for dark patterns? He had a similar sounding word for dark patterns. I remember Tom was fascinated by this. I think you made a comment about it on Slack as well.
Oh, really? I have no memory of that.
Pressure's on, Tom. Oh.
No worries. No, I'm not. I've had to reread all this stuff many times to embed these in my memory myself, to be very honest. So okay, it's sludge. Term is sludge. And I think I covered this in Nudge class as well. So sludge is something, well, it's a dark pattern. He came up with that. And he came up with it in a much more recent interview, or like 2013 or 2014, like quite later, compared to Nudge, which was written in 2008 or 2009. It's been quite a while, I think. Anyways, so open discussion. Have you guys set up any snudges or self nudges for yourself since the course began?
I can share mine, but Ashwin, you already know this one.
Yeah.
So I created a bookmark for YouTube because I go there often. And instead of bookmarking the homepage of YouTube, I bookmark my favorite yogi. So it's my way of telling myself every time I'm clicking on YouTube, it's like, hey, it looks like you have time to watch YouTube. So maybe have some time for yoga as well.
That's a great one.
Very
Super,
nice.
yeah.
That's so powerful.
I think bookmarks are so underrated, but they're actually really helpful if you constantly look at the screen, at the browser. It's really nice. I had something similar in terms of I had to learn Finnish.
Yeah.
And just like nail it in just 2 months, which was obviously quite a lot to do, but it wasn't my first time trying, so I just needed to refresh and just get better. And
Yeah.
I had like physical and digital space nudges, like some of them were indeed bookmarks, including on my phone. I would save, as I said, I think last time during the last class, I would save a web page as a quick link on the screen, on the main screen. So you kind of open it like it's an app or something, and quickly jump in. But I also, like, as a snudge, I put Finnish language books and magazines and newspapers, whatever I could find really, just around the house. So you couldn't escape Finnish, basically, even if you wanted to.
That's terrific.
It was a good nudge, like, because you would sit down and you would see something, some kind of material, and you would be like, okay, hey, that's a good time. I'm now resting. I could actually read this now. So it worked perfectly. Oh, and
That's
another nudge is I was telling other people about this, and I don't know if it's probably not in the area of nudging, but it was really helpful. People started recommending really nice shows in Finnish, and I just realized that helped me a lot to just watch people speak and actually have an interesting plot to follow. So yeah, I just wanted to share anyway.
Sorry, the last one, I kind of missed it.
It's not a nudge. It's not in the area of nudges, but I mentioned that I told some people that I'm learning Finnish, and they would sometimes recommend some kind of movies or series like Nordic noir, that like detective shows or whatever on Netflix, in Finnish, made in Finland, and it was actually super good and worked really well for me.
Yeah, I guess that it is a kind of nudge, I guess, if the reminder to watch it comes up when you're firing up your Netflix or something.
That's true. Yeah, that's true, and it's always there, kind of continue. Yeah,
exactly. I should actually take these snudges up and snudge myself as well, because I'd really love to learn Finnish as well, but in a very sort of non-intense and sort of ongoing manner, pretty organic, would you say, and situated, let's say, one of the things I tried was I tried putting post-its of what the Finnish words for what things are around the house back in the day. And so I could increase my vocabulary of common things, but then post-its fall off. And I don't know if that's a nudge. And these are the kinds of categorical definitions that you'll get into once we start practicing, because if it's not actively enabling me to make a choice, right? A post-it on a box is definitely a feature of my environment, but it's not enabling me to make a choice. So would that count as a nudge? And I think it's important to be kind of a bit pedantic about these things and be a bit like nerdy about these things, because the more we can distinguish between what is something and what isn't something, the better we get as professionals. But that's a difficult question, and Taylor would probably say that's not a nudge, but it's not a trigger either. Is it a label?
Yeah.
What is it? And but it definitely helps in learning the freaking language. So it's like,
Yeah.
anyways, a good one. Any more nudges?
I think I can share mine.
Sure.
I'm recently trying to nudge myself to work out more. So my way to do so is to follow as much fitness influencer on Instagram as possible. So whenever you're like reading your Instagram, and there will be a lot of like photo with good shape, like influencer with good shape popping up. And at that time, you're just like, oh, maybe it's time for working out.
Exactly.
I think, yeah, that is quite useful.
Yeah, inspiration is like a huge thing. I think we miss when we are feeling like life's not going anywhere. It's either looking at small goals that we've accomplished, right? Reminding ourselves of progress. And the other is to keep the journey and the final goal kind of aware and in your face. And that what you're doing is certainly helping in that regard, I think. Great. If anyone else thinks of any nudges, let me know, or you can speak up. Great. Long-term behavior change is probably a function of these three patterns. Name the missing pattern.
What was it? Relearning or removing something, wasn't it? Because there was one that was more negative than starting something new. But I don't remember how it was phrased. And maybe somebody could help.
Yeah. Was Philip going for the button there?
Philip is going through his
Yeah,
Notion
I'm not-
notes at the moment, I think.
That's totally right, actually.
Birds of a feather. Recognize each other. Rascals. Seriously? Do it. Yeah, Sia is actually very close. It's stopping old behaviors. And this thinking comes out of Fogg's Purple Path Behavior Guide. There's also, Nir Eyal has a matrix of behavior change thing, which I didn't have time to touch, but I can drop it if you want into the Slack. And these are the two frameworks where actually the Purple Path Behavior Guide is, I think, the only comprehensive one which clearly looks at stopping old behaviors, continuing existing behaviors, and starting new behaviors. And I think this is the level of depth we really need to go, I think, if we want to think of behavior design, because clearly, new behavior change is going to happen as a function of all these good things, continuing good things that are ongoing, and starting those new behaviors, but getting those old behaviors out of the way, which I think is a big one, which creates space for new behaviors and energy for new behaviors. All right. Next, Well, okay. Which book is this visual from? I'm sorry, I thought I would first ask about the visual itself. Yes. Which chemical's functioning is being depicted in this visual? Sia? No. Someone else?
Well, you're trying to
Choosing-
alleviate this
Sorry?
wanting, but I don't know what chemical. Wait, so what chemical? I don't know.
Okay.
I
Katie?
think it's something like dopamine, do something.
Okay. Sorry?
Dopamine.
It's dopamine. Yeah. Right? Kind of dopamine is the... Tom, did you know the answer to that one?
Yeah, isn't it dopamine?
Yes. Philip, did you recall the answer to that one?
I would also say so.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Again, in behavior design, I think if anyone's ever talking about any chemical in the brain ever, it's probably about dopamine, because there's not really that much researched and brought into behavior change as a field, because dopamine is associated strongly with reward, and behavior is all about action. And so, I mean, so it's typically that. But I did bring up a book which I took this visual from. This whole idea that, you know, a signal, and the dopamine rises with the signal and the input of like a trigger or a signal. When that's received, then dopamine gives you the energy to do the work. And this is actually very new. This is the last 4 or 5 years in behavioral science that this thinking is new, where they're saying it's not actually, you don't get it when you get the reward. You get a dopamine boost to do the work to get a reward, right? And it came out of a really landmark book. I know I'm pushing the limits here. I did talk about this book a couple of times, but I was wondering if anyone remembered. The book and author, Jamie. Okay.
But it's not Nir Eyal, is it? Because I want to say Nir Eyal because he's also the same
So
category.
this is a good place to talk about lenses, right? What lens would you apply to this kind of thinking, Sia?
True, it's neuroscientific.
Exactly.
it's
And
not Nir Eyal.
what domain
Yeah.
of scholar is Nir Eyal?
He's either cognitive or
He is in the
behavioral
cognitive.
economics. Yeah.
Exactly, both. So anyone who's doing design work is mostly in the cognitive space. And then if they're doing anything to do, they're talking anything about nudges or prospect theory or biases, then they are between cognitive and behavioral economics. So only when they get into neurons, chemicals, this is how your brain works. Nir Eyal does talk about it, actually. That's actually a good guess, because he does bring in the whole dopamine pathway thing when talking about rewards. So that's actually a really good response, but he doesn't go to this level of depth. And this is a book called Behave. And the fact that it's called Behave, I think that justifies the reason why it should just be on your reading list, and you should browse through it. It's an easy to read book by Robert Sapolsky, who's I think he's a Stanford prof, if I'm not mistaken, but of neuroscience, and he's terrific. His videos are terrific, and he gets into neuroscience, understandable neuroscience very well. And he also talks, the book is about how humans at our best and worst. So he's got this very interesting frame where he's trying to look at how we do extraordinary things, what our brains look like when we do extraordinary things, altruistic things, compassionate things in such brain states, and also like terribly horrible, terrible things. So he kind of takes you through this incredible journey of neuroscience and looks at it, and it's a remarkably inspiring and kind of dense book, but it's also a cool book because you can just jump right into a topic and read about it. And you can say, well, I want to read about dopamine, and look it up in the index, and then just go read those pages and it makes complete sense. Behave is the book. All right. Nudges almost completely focus on changing the dash, dash, dash.
Environment.
Spot on. Nailed it. Yay. Absolutely. So that's one of the things about nudges which make them what they are and different from the other lenses like the neuroscience lens. I mean, or research or work in the neuroscience area, which is very internal. It's almost entirely about changing the human. It's almost entirely about changing the you. But nudges, and that's why nudges are in some sense very democratic. They're very fair because they are all about changing the world and help people make decisions. But then what nudge practitioners struggle with is how to personalize something, because the whole theory is grounded in very individual agnostic interventions. And so that's why always combining nudge thinking with something on the cognitive side, something on the human side, the cultural side, all of that starts to become much more powerful for you as a behavior designer. All right. Great, take some time for this, but first the question. In the field of behavioral economics, what is this classic term? There is a classic term used to describe this gap between what you thought you'd do and what actually happened.
Cognitive dissonance.
Yay, that's not quite correct, Katie.
Oh no.
But
Oh,
that's-
what actually happened?
Yes,
Oh,
I think you were a bit quick with that one, but no worries. So yeah, there's a classic term and it'll come up a lot in behavioral economics. This gap between what you thought you'd do and what actually happened. So I thought I would practice a language, learn every day, but actually I bought some books and downloaded apps without ever using them. Or something like work and grow consistently was the A.
Wait. But it's not bias, is it?
No.
Or is bias causing the gap potentially?
That's a tricky question. I have to think about that. Actually, no, it's not causing the gap.
I have a gap in my knowledge to know what this behavioral gap is.
No problem.
I can't remember
No
what
worries.
this
Yes.
might be personally. Yeah.
It's very classic. Also, basically I put together all the things that you kind of would be like kind of something you would become increasingly familiar with and encounter many times in the literature. Well, it's called the intention action gap. And I also talked about it a few times or a couple of times. And it's classic. You'll find lots and lots of papers or references to this gap in human behavior, which the behavioral economists call the intention action gap. So the intention is one thing and the action is the other. And wake up at 5 a.m. every day, but I slept in and hit the snooze button. Now, a bias is it's kind of like a cognitive error you make, right? See, when you look at a bunch of choices and have to make a decision, right? I'm trying to hire someone and I'm biased towards a particular gender. I'm trying to run and I'm trying to buy running shoes and I'm biased towards a particular choice. But this whole intention action gap is studied in behavioral economics as a more sort of this problem of not being able to like take the right action. And so it kind of it's more, they say that you can solve this gap. They don't talk about the genesis of it. They talk more about you can solve it through good choice architecture,
Mm.
right? And that's why they're all about that context. They're all about designing the bedroom. They're all about designing the world around you, and they're all about designing the workplace, all those environments where those choices are made, so you can make better choices. Go ahead, Jamie.
Okay. After in the case when something happened, I guess for the people in those cases and didn't do what they thought they were going to do, wouldn't there then be cognitive dissonance?
I think you could have some cognitive dissonance anywhere in this process, right? Cognitive dissonance is a little bit more like, well, most importantly, it's some sort of disruption with your self-comfort or your self-schema, right? Well, what I believe, actually I have a couple of questions there coming up on CogDis, but where what you believe. And so let's say the first one, waking up early, right? Wake up at 5 a.m. every day. You could have made that choice to wake up at 5 a.m. every day. Like you could have made that decision or the intention. You could have it out of a state of cognitive dissonance, you see? So for example, the previous night, if someone had challenged me and said, hey, you said you'll be waking up very early. Are you a disciplined person or not? So then I have this cognitive dissonance between, oh crap, I am telling everyone that I'm a disciplined person and I believe I'm a disciplined person, but I'm not really doing anything about it. I shall wake up at 5 a.m. every day, right? So you're trying to resolve dissonance through that intention. So that cognitive dissonance
essentially
could,
before the decision.
Exactly, or it can happen later, like so you. But see, and in that sense, Katie, I can totally get what Katie was going for, because cognitive dissonance is playing in definitely into the choices we make, the decisions we make, the intentions we have. It's really across. So let's say you made that decision last night, and then the next morning, when the alarm actually rang, you felt so incredibly exhausted because you've also been working like crazy and the weather's been hot, and there's a number of reasons. And then it's at that moment that you say, I may be not keeping up my promises about being disciplined, but I deserve this freaking rest. I deserve to rest first before I go out running, and I can't go out running in this devastated situation, or it could be raining. So cognitive dissonance is at work there as well, you see. So I was going for more the phenomena of what we intend and what we act on, and this gap.
Yeah, absolutely. I was I guess thinking in each of these cases, there was some decision that was made and then it didn't actually happen. And so the likely, I guess there's no, it's not guaranteed, but those are highly likely situations where there would be some dissonance of, well, something happened and this isn't reality. So something's got to bridge that gap.
Yeah, I would say that if there's almost a third piece to it, I would call that cognitive dissonance, because when your intentions and your actions don't align, then I think we are left with the dissonance, right? And you'd be like, damn, I couldn't follow through on what I planned.
Right.
So, but it wouldn't necessarily be dissonance causing it. Like, it may not necessarily. It could be,
afterwards.
or throughout actually.
Or throughout.
Yeah, CogDis is such a wide concept. It applies It's like everywhere. But again, behavioral economists, behavioral designers will speak a little bit about cognitive dissonance, but behavioral economists will never speak about it. It's very weird because they don't consider themselves behavioral psychologists. They studied economics, they studied things like commerce and statistics and stuff. And they barely get into anything cognitive. So again, if the term intention action comes up, you're in the behavioral economics ballpark, and it's something that they bring up a lot. And I actually think it's not a fully fledged concept. It's a good concept, the intention action gap, but it's a little bit incomplete without the cognitive dissonance and the cognitive pieces, I think. Great. But yeah. Which of the following is not among Cialdini's principles of persuasion? Cialdini wrote the book Influence, Italian scholar, and it's kind of like the most cited book on persuasion, modern book. And he spoke about all these principles except one of them.
Sorry, part of what class was this?
Persuasion and engagement.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Iris.
I think it's pick and roll. Pick and roll.
All right. Why is that, Iris?
Because I can recall the rest are principles of persuasion, and I think pick and roll is under other theory.
Yeah, you're right. It's actually the peak end rule that's not part of it. The peak end rule actually was developed again through Kahneman's work, and he was the first to come up with this in Thinking Fast and Slow, where he goes a lot into memories and experiences. And he talks about how our memories of experiences are how we remember them. And, you have the experience in real time, then you have the memory of the experience. And those two things are not the same cognitively. And especially they're not the same in terms of how we value them. And he gives these brilliant examples of how we can have kind of high value experiences, but after the experience is over, we don't really value them so much because you remember experiences by peaks and ends. We don't have the capacity, the mental bandwidth, the storage space to lock our entire an entire memory of an experience into our heads and experience the whole joy of it. So we'd rather just keep the highlights, the peaks and the ends. So that's peak end rule is in a completely different context, whereas Cialdini's principles of persuasion are authority, scarcity, consistency, liking, consensus. And authority, scarcity, I forget the last one. Liking, consensus. I forget the last one. But
reciprocity.
Sorry? Reciprocity. Exactly. Yeah. Those are really handy as well. As you can see, those are at a slightly like a higher level and more general, like authority, reciprocity, scarcity, liking, consensus, and they're all kind of in this very positive space, I guess. None of them are very well. Scarcity is kind of a little bit of a dark hat, and authority can be white hat or dark hat. So whereas the peak end rule is a very specific sort of bam, very mechanical sort of a rule. Okay. What is this definition describing? A cognitive unit, so something that's mental, it's not real, that organizes information across categories and defines the relationships among them.
What is a schema?
That's a schema. Good one.
Is
And
that
this-
like a Jeopardy format?
I've actually never played
That's
That's
Jeopardy.
exactly what I was thinking.
I've never played Jeopardy. Should I? Damn, more board games. So, hey, this is a model of something from the book, something. Also like really handy and good to have on your shelf. So I'm hoping you will remember.
Since from the subliminal book.
Subliminal. Same class,
Subliminal.
but not the same book, Philip. Or actually,
Can I make
pre-
the
previous-
guess that the first one is motivation,
Mhm.
but I don't know the book.
Okay,
Was it
Katie.
something about engage something? Yeah, Katie, go ahead if you know.
It is engaged. Yes, yeah. So it is a model of motivation from the book Engaged, and this is a new model. So Amy Butcher or Amy Bucher, who's the head of Engaged, she's doing like really like I think some of the leading work in behavior design. And because she's the one amongst the behavior or even the behavioral design crowd who gets more into the cognitive side of things, who looks at things like motivation. And she has created this controlled versus autonomous model. Does anyone remember where the basis of this controlled versus autonomous motivation, where the theory comes from, what that theory is called in the much older work of these guys which we discussed? Remembering. Okay, we talked about self-determination theory. Mhm. Sorry, I was in a rush, Jamie.
Oh, that's all right.
Self-determination.
I was debating whether or not to format as a Jeopardy question again.
Self-determination theory was the one developed by these guys, DC and Ryan, long time ago, and that's absolutely essential stuff to read. And they came up with this breakthrough sort of model or way of thinking about motivation and saying motivation isn't about more or less motivation, it's about also the type of motivation. And it doesn't matter if it's more or less, but if it's autonomous, then you have enormous power because you're doing it, it's intrinsic, you're doing it for the pleasure. And if it's controlled, then you're not going to be able to sustain that motivation because the reason for doing it, the driver lies outside. And so, but no one put it on a spectrum like this and in a visual like this until Amy Bucher in the book Engaged. So it's a very handy model of motivation to print and have on your wall any single time. Just have it there, you can work with it. Great. This is the second type of choice called that we talked about. Choices in the now and I'm sure some of you remember this. It's just on the tip of your tongue.
I'm just gonna guess intertemporal or something like that.
Yeah, why don't you just say it? Yeah. Just guess, that's it. Guess is great. Wow, I love Sia's reaction. Intertemporal choice. Or choices across time, right? And it's a whole field by itself. If it's something you want to read about, oh man, it gets computational or statistical very fast. It's one of the more denser areas of choice theory where there's people writing these complex white papers, which we designers, we need a data scientist to crack those things, I think. Anyways, intertemporal choice, what happens, choices that you have to make now, but affect your future choices and the value from those future choices. And things like saving consistently over time or who to partner up with. not direct simple choices between alternatives in the now. Okay, intertemporal choice or choice across time is the answer. Okay, two kinds of triggers we discussed are sparks and facilitators from Fogg's theory. What was the third kind of trigger that we discussed? This is more recent.
It's a signal. And I cheated
Yes.
because I had notes open and my eyes just fell on it. But it's a
You
signal.
actually looked it up, Sia?
Yeah, no, I just opened the recent one today.
No problem.
Yeah, wasn't on
Yeah.
purpose, but yeah.
That's fine. It's nice to get the info. Two kinds of triggers we discussed: the sparks, facilitators, and signals. So again, if you're trying to do your work and you're trying to think about triggers, remember that there's already some decent thinking on kinds of triggers. And actually, I wanted to kind of massage your brains a bit more. So this is the graph or the visual from Fogg's work. He's talking about motivation and ability, are two of the two key dimensions of his behavior change model. And the third is a trigger. And in this one, he's talking about the different kinds of trigger, but he's placed them on this matrix against motivation and ability. So he calls a kind of trigger on the top left, which when the user has high motivation but low ability, we need a trigger that's a facilitator. It facilitates, it enables, it increases ability. And it says, do it now, right? So you start to see it's kind of an interesting model, because in some ways, a trigger is not something that just is irrelevant or is completely something separate. A third element, it's almost like it amplifies one of these two elements according to his model. So the second kind of trigger is this one on the right bottom: low motivation, high ability. You need a spark, is what Fogg says, something that sparks the motivation in the user. But then if you have both, then all you need is something called a signal. It's just a cue to do the behavior now, and probably the behavior will happen. Someone's making coffee. So I wanted to discuss this symbol and have your thoughts on what do you think the symbol is on the right, kind of danger sign or warning sign. Do you think it's a facilitator, signal, spark?
Signal.
Okay, why would that be, Philip?
Well, it has a high ability. It forces you to that you pay your attention, and it has the visual ability to motivate you as well. The high motivation, I would say so. What do you guys?
For me, it's more of a facilitator, because it basically tells you, look, it's a warning, something is off on the road, for example, something's blocking your way, so you have very low ability. However, you want to get from point A to point B, but you have to be mindful of this. So you have high motivation. So I'd say it's facilitator.
So, Philip, how would you, because Sia is saying that if you have low ability in that moment, always think about the moment and on the scenario. And Philip is saying there would be high ability. You have high ability in that scenario. So
I said a high motivation.
What is the motivation there? Both of you agree that the motivation is high in that moment. So what is the motivation? Sia says it's to get from place A to place B. Is there any other motivation that you have while driving in that moment, which is high?
Like survive on the road,
Exactly.
possibly, if it's in a very bad place. Yeah.
Your motivation to avoid an accident is pretty freaking high at all times.
What about the motivation to respect the rules?
As well, depends on where you're from. That's a cultural question. But so we agree that motivation is high in this moment. Very good. So it's not a spark. Great. Now, is it augmenting my ability, or is it amplifying my ability, or is it simply cueing me when I have high ability? What would be the ability here? Or lack of ability?
I would say it depends on the person driving the car.
Agreed.
Their
But
specific ability.
You could absolutely. That's so true.
But probably in this case, the ability, if they're driving, able to, the assumption of a baseline level of ability to navigate obstacles.
Exactly. Yes. Be responsive, right? And could depend on if there was ice on the road, whatnot, visibility. But basically, ability to navigate obstacles, handle the car, right? And we could add handle the car in an emergency, right? Ines, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say I also think it's signal, because you do have the ability to slow down, and this signal does not increase your ability to slow down. It just kind of signals to you that you
Brilliant. Brilliant. Any other thoughts? Well, honestly, it was slightly a trick question, because have you considered that it can be both? So this is, for me, it's a trigger that's actually both a facilitator and a signal, depending on who. So visibility, Ines, for example, I might have all the ability to slow down the car, but I might not have visibility of the road. I might be talking to a friend. I might be engrossed in music, and that curve is coming along, and a signal like that amplifies my ability, my lack of cognitive resources, or I'm not using them. I'm paying attention to something else. And the signal amplifies my ability and can totally work as a facilitator as well. But it's most certainly a spark as well. So that would be called a hybrid trigger, but it's just a terminology, but really. It's also interesting to think about, like, those two on the top. Yeah, signals are interesting, right? I mean, they have they have qualities of both in some ways. Signals have qualities of facilitators, and they have qualities of sparks, because they share the high in the high ability and the high motivation. The signals are high, basically. So, but something to think about. Great answers. So what would a crash bag be?
Well, I won't say it's a signal. I don't know why. It's a signal that you just fucked up.
Is it the exploded crash bag, or the one that is still
Wow, that's
inside?
crazy. You're talking about the states. I'm just referring to them generally, I guess, as a thing, as an intervention, something which has the potential to explode and prevent damage.
I would say it's spark.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it's not a trigger at all, because there's no behavior that you're taking.
Yes,
it's just not.
Exactly. That was the answer that at least I had, and I'm sure you can differ with me, because these are not perfect, but I think a trigger is something which prompts a behavior to be done. So a trigger, the other side of trigger, you have human agency. You have the individual who has the ability, who has the motivation, who has all of those resources in that moment to make a choice or to do a behavior. But a crash bag is beyond that moment. It's when you hijack agency from the user. Things are too late.
I don't fully agree with this one, because if I had two cars, I could choose, and I would have one that has a crash bag and the other one that doesn't have a crash bag.
Ah, yeah.
It would be the trigger to buy one.
That's fantastic. Yes, then it would be a trigger, I think. Yes, that's a great.
Also, I think,
what an answer. Amazing.
At least if I'm wearing like a bike helmet, I'm not sure if this works when I'm driving a car, but I find myself driving a little bit more recklessly if I know I'm, protected.
Mm.
So,
So is it a nudge in some ways? Then it also prevents or guides you from doing certain irresponsible behaviors.
I think it's like a facilitator to driving more recklessly, to be honest.
Oh wow! But do you think anyone would drive more recklessly with a helmet? I understand, but with a crash bag, would I just go faster because I have a crash bag? I'm like, yeah, let's see what happens.
Well, have you ever driven like a really, really crappy car versus like, I don't know, some factory made Tesla or something? It's like a really different experience
Mhm.
when you can really feel the road in a way. But maybe the
Interesting.
crash bag is a little bit more abstract. You can't really feel it.
I see. Great. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of dilemmas you got to kind of, navigate when it comes to behavior design, going from theory to practice. Awesome points. I threw this graphic up at some point. We're talking about exactly what was missing in that, what's missing in the graphic there. Theories lead to something, which lead to findings, which then takes you into evidence, first principle, system view, and behavior. Do you remember this graphic and what was in the missing spot? Jamie and I had a long conversation after this.
Is it experiment or something?
Yeah.
It's actually in the domain of experimentation, but this is almost like the methodology for experimentation. Jamie had a different point of view as well on this.
Was it a hype?
I did.
Mm-hmm. It is, Ines?
Was it a hypothesis?
That's right. It is a hypothesis, right? So the idea is that you form theories, you have a theory about something, about how something generally works, you have a belief, and then you form a hypothesis, which is a clear causal explanation of behavior in our case. And then you go to use experiments to do some findings. And you move from left to right. And findings give you evidence. With more evidence, you arrive at some principles, which then gives you some view of the system, and your theory becomes more and more solid. And Jamie, I think it was after the call, we had a call, and he said that he saw theory as coming at the other end, that it starts with hypothesis, findings, and then you actually arrive at a theory. And I said, that's exactly why it's cyclical here. I totally agree with that as well. And that's also how the scientific method is, that you arrive at theories based on hypothesis. But I also did some more research after our call and realized that actually it really does work like this as well, because many times you just have to start with some theory, or a theory that's kind of handed down to you, which says theory of gravity is just something that it's not a hypothesis, it's a belief system that we inherit growing up, and we just believe there's something called gravity. But from that you could come to this hypothesis, or go back to some other scientist's hypothesis and say, oh well, he said his hypothesis was if you dropped an apple and it fell down, it proves that we have gravity. So how could we design an experiment to test it? So anyways, long story short, but that's the go ahead, Jane.
You kind of summarized that well. And the theory, I think there's I guess the colloquial meaning of a theory. It's like, oh, I have an idea. I've got this theory about this thing. And that's it's the confusion in nomenclature.
Yes.
I think in the scientific method, a theory is the end result. So is like the solid, the thing that is solid, the most solid. And it's sort of I don't know, I guess a nod to the scientific method, in that everything, even the most like the most fundamental things, like the most structured thing is a theory. And so things like all the deeply most held beliefs are even still like liable to change. Like things kind of happen to change it. But in the scientific method, the theory is the end result. And the theory of gravity, theory of relativity, like yeah, so starting from, you may start hypotheses from anything, from an idea, have something and create a hypothesis from it, and then once it's been proven, then it becomes a theory.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's
no, that's really
so anyway.
good to know what the canonical you know, definition of the word theory is. Certainly makes a lot of sense. I'm just thinking of, you know, applying all that in the behavioral space and the use of that word. And I'm trying to understand an essay, for example, written by Cassie Kozikov, who I've quoted a couple of times, head of data science at Google. She has an essay on Medium called Never Start with a Hypothesis. And I don't know where she's pre-data science, or she gets quite quickly into statistics and ML type stuff. But I think we should share and we should co-read that all together and figure out what does she mean. Is she going in this direction that you need to have a theory about something before you ever frame a hypothesis, or because she's clearly a very reputed, you know, scientific thinker, she's not going against the scientific method. But I'm wondering if there's some development in thought there that she's offering. I kind of based my graphic a little bit on that kind of thinking, like there's more recent stuff as well. But I, to be honest, I don't know the exact truth to that, except that these things seem to be related, and it seems handy to say, do you have a theory about it? Because the problem I want to not get into is confuse a hypothesis and a theory. I think a lot of the times people are actually, they're talking about a personal belief or a personal theory for something, but they're calling it a hypothesis, you know, because they know that they have to start with a hypothesis, and having a hypothesis is important, but they don't know how to differentiate between a theory and a hypothesis. And especially if you're talking about behavior change, we're trying to talk about something, the input and the output. This was the cause and this behavior happened. And until you have a very structured statement that captures that, you don't really have a hypothesis. You have beliefs, you have assumptions before that. So for me, that word theory is that world of beliefs, assumptions, untested, unverified data, knowledge.
Yeah, which totally makes sense.
Yeah.
From my end, what is Neil deGrasse Tyson was where I got this from. He makes very big point about this, about the confusion, also the confusion of a hypothesis. And yeah, people saying they have a hypothesis when they don't. When hypothesis is something, well, yeah, confusing hypotheses and theories, and it's also they can mean kind of both things. Theory and hypotheses, you could kind of use it interchangeably in a sentence, but really depending on the lens that you're looking at it, it's right. They don't actually cross over like that. But colloquially, I got a hypothesis about this.
This is a great conversation, because yeah, exactly. Or I have a theory about it. You know,
I have a theory about this.
I have a theory about this. Or, yeah, I think this is a really good conversation, because this is something we could go into more in behavior at scale in class 12. Kind of play around with a few theories versus hypotheses specific to behavior change and behavior design, and look at how these things are distinguished. So, great combo as usual. But we should also exchange that Neil deGrasse Tyson's piece if it's possible somehow.
Yeah, and the other article from I forgot the lady's name. You said
Cassie. Yeah.
Cassie.
Sweetness. Pop quiz, moving on. Oh yeah, this heavy, crazy freaking graphic, which I thought was really important when I revisited. I thought, oh shit, there's so much here, which is important. What's the other dimension in this matrix? So we were talking about displeasure and pleasure, or what is called valence, on one axis, the x-axis here. And all of those other little things are these, those states are mind states or emotional states, right? But there's this other y-axis with the question marks. Do you remember what that was? Because they're actually very close to each other, and it's quite subtle, the distinction. I totally understand if you don't get it or remember.
Was it arousal?
It was arousal. It was arousal, Tom. Exactly. And actually, until you see these examples, you don't really get what the heck is the difference between valence and arousal. For a long time, I myself confused them when I read Nir Eyal talks about valence, for example, briefly in some of his talks and stuff. But really, almost like the quality of the emotion, and this is, this helps you understand. It helps you qualify your emotion and your motivation work. Again, we are very interested in motivation, and we are interested in emotion because it powers motivation as behavior designers, because we're interested in action, right? That's our final goal, is what makes people do things. So emotion is fascinating, massive study, but there are a lot of people who study emotion for emotion's sake. Like this is the emotional quality of becoming a mother. This is the emotional quality of being angry. This is the emotional quality of being a liberal or a nationalist. But we are more interested in, okay, if that's the emotional quality, how does that power my motivation? Because motivation is the one that gives velocity to action, right? And it creates the action potential, so to speak. So that's why we're interested in this whole thing. And to look at emotion on one scale, you have something called valence, is negative or positive, and you have push and pull motivation, push of getting away from displeasure and the pull towards pleasure. But on the other hand, there's this funny thing called arousal. So funky. It's just what is the arousal level of that particular emotion? And so you can have negative valence, but be very aroused and be much more in this sort of space. Or you can have negative valence and be really like under aroused. So again, if you take this model and then try to apply the 3 kinds of triggers here, you see how the lenses and the concepts start getting overlaid in terms of behavior design. You can start with this, then you can look at, okay, what about my motivation and ability in each of these states, and then look at, okay, what kind of triggers can I apply? So that's how the work gets done. It's just overlaying of all these different concepts. So anyways, long story, but this one here is arousal. Come on. The following are functions of which system? Anyone remember what I'm referring to by system?
System 2. No, system 1.
Okay.
Okay.
And how do you characterize that system, Iris? How do you describe that system?
Because that's the answer 2 plus 2, it's rather easy to answer, and it's sort of like you don't have to think.
Great.
Yeah, so I'll identify as system 1.
Very good. It is, they are very system 1, all of them. System 1 is the fast thinking. So remember the title of the book, Thinking Fast and Slow. The first is system 1, the second is system 2. Fast thinking is also intuitive thinking, so-called intuitive thinking. but there's a lot of research or kind of theory thinking, There is knowledge that, or there's also discussions that you can train something that's fast, that's slow, and it starts as system 2 activity and becomes a system 1 activity, right? So if you take 2 + 2, you didn't know that it was 4 when you were 3 or 2 years old, but now you can snap. So snap judgments, all of that is a function of the system 1, same as recognizing. And almost all of these, as you can see, are coming with practice. They're not just there when you're born. Maybe some of them detect that one object is more distant than another. That's very deeply ingrained. Make a disgust face when shown a horrible picture. That's so culturally sensitive, to be honest. It's hard to tell, like some different cultures read emotions differently. So, but still, here is an example: detect hostility in a voice. All of them classic system 1. Okay, so third level of design as developed by Donovan. Going from the bottom.
Is it emotional?
It's not the,
Visceral.
yes, it is visceral. Yes, well, emotional design is the book's title, so you probably got a little confused there, but you're also right that that visceral does create this sort of very emotional reaction. Visceral, behavioral, reflective, and we are very concerned with that second level and the relationship between, or the influence of the other two on the behavioral level. Okay. What's the decision-making style that we discussed from the book? Paradox of choice. We looked at maximizers and
Optimizers.
Close. The meaning is actually right, but that's not the right term, Ines.
Is it something?
Oh, God, satisfier.
Satisficers is right. Talking it. Yep. So, and satisficer is an important term to know because it's been around in design theory as well. It's not just in choice theory. It's been around in design literature. You find it in like design principle books. It is when it's preferable to settle for a satisfactory solution rather than pursue an optimal solution. I think this is such a brilliant concept because actually I realize that your decision-making style may actually change between these two depending on your time and context. So let's say you went into the wine store on a weekend and you were very much in maximizer mindset, right? You went in saying, today I have the budget, I'm going to get myself a proper nice bottle of wine for me and my friends. And you have in your mind this sort of idea that you want to know where the wine's from, you want to talk about it, you want to taste it, you want to talk about pairings, you want to discuss it with your friends. You're in that kind of a purchase mindset. And then like you've spent a good 20 minutes looking around, and then you get a text from your friend or a call from your friend, and they're like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm picking wine. They're like, oh, don't worry, we got 6 bottles already. Just pick something and get here. In fact, we can pick you up outside the store in 1 minute. What happens? You go from being a maximizer to becoming a satisficer in 1 second. And you're like, yeah, that's not happening. Let me just grab the best thing I can find, because now you're thinking more about how to settle for a satisfactory solution rather than pursue the optimal solution. So Ines, it was actually my bad, but you said optimizer, and an optimizer would be a maximizer actually, according to this definition. So you're either a satisfizer or an optimizer / maximizer, right? Even though this is a pretty tricky definition, I took this definition straight from design principles. What's it called? Handbook of Design Principles. And optimal, is it still a maximizing? I'm not very sure about that. Yeah. All right, satisfies us and maximizes. Okay, few more. Cognitive dissonance. How would you describe it? How can you best describe it? And hint, the visual is assistive, but it's a little bit of a decoy as well. Basically, I'm asking you guys to describe cognitive dissonance, just in your own words, to refresh that concept.
Shall I try again?
Please, Katie.
So it's I guess going against something that you want to do or be. So it's like a conflict between what an intention or a belief, and then an action of like what you actually do.
Exactly. Well, you absolutely understand it perfectly fine.
Yay.
So anyone else want to have had a different thought that you want to share? That's also super interesting.
Well, to me, it's like whenever there's a mismatch between like my sort of mental model about something and then like evidence about that stuff, like then I have to like adjust something in my mental model or discredit the evidence somehow.
I think you said it. You're also saying you're describing it right. Anyone had yet another take on it?
On the cognitive dissonance, could one say that it's a deviation from your own set of values or the system of thinking?
Yes, you could.
In a way?
Yes, absolutely.
On top of what everything else has been said, because I don't want to repeat it.
Great, absolutely. I think that's all those are true, and that's why kind of having a very clear, sort of crystal clear central definition about it becomes super important. And this is the one that I like to stick to as my kind of reality check. It's basically a dissonance or a clash, a conflict between your knowledge, your values, your beliefs, your attitudes, and your actions. If there's, take away these 5 keywords, because you'll find it covers everything. Even though Tom's definition sounded pretty far from Katie's, they're actually saying the same thing, because Katie basically described it exactly like that. She didn't name all of them, but she made exactly the same point about the same things. And Tom was actually describing knowledge. So when you have a mental state, okay, this is my idea of the event, and I get to the event, or this is my idea, this is my schema of a historical building, I go there and I find that it's not what I thought it is, then you're having a dissonance, a conflict between your belief about the building and the knowledge that you just got about the building, the fact of the building, that it's orange and not as broken as you thought it would be. And so you have a cognitive dissonance there. So you have to resolve that dissonance, because if you don't, you feel uncomfortable. It challenges your self-schema. So yeah, that's an easy way to remember when you have these things are in conflict or when they are in dissonance. Again, it's easy to remember that you want to restore consonance, which is harmony, and you're in dissonance. So you do something. Sometimes your behavior can be one of the ingredients that contributes to that dissonance in the first place. All right. I had another slide about it. So it also basically, it hijacks your positive self schema. What happens when you go see that building that is not what you thought it was. Your self schema, which you always wanted to be positive. That's the interesting thing about the self concept, and why the self concept is so important is that with anything else we can live with a negative schema. You thought the park, the nature park would be green and empty, but you found it, I'm sorry to say, but you found it crowded and kind of with trash. You can shift your schema and say, oh, the park was not as nice as I thought it would be. You had a schema that this course was going to be something, it turned out to be less than expected. You can change your schema about it. But when it comes to your self schema, you cannot live with the negative self schema. So you have to adjust something, to change one of those elements when it comes to yourself, to restore that consonance. That's where cognitive dissonance is at the deepest. It's a concept of identity. So I can say, yeah, the building may be different than what I thought, but does that mean my sense of history is not as good as I thought? You either agree with that and say, well, I'm not as educated as I thought I was, or you might change it and say, well, in the book I read, that book was kind of dodgy, isn't it? About this book. Or it's been a long time since I took the history lesson. Obviously, I couldn't remember the details right. You have to find some way to restore your positive self-concept. And to resolve cognitive dissonance.
So to bring back the intention action gap.
Yes.
And looking at it over here, the intention was, I guess, positive intention is to, I guess, not necessarily improve the self schema, or part of a positive self schema, and then the action is the piece that was missing in this gap, which is, and then I guess that was similar between them. The action. Well, what is?
There's something there. You've got to frame the intention very carefully in this example. For example, about the building, let's say, and they're related, but they're not like directly functions of each other. So the action is some behavior, right? And the intention was, I guess the intention could be something like to see the building, like to thoroughly see the building. Or let's say, I believe my schema about the building was that it was a piece of Baroque architecture. And since I'm a student of architecture, my intention was to study it for the next 3 hours, like do a proper architecture, immersive architecture day. Then I get there and I find that it's actually not Baroque at all. I find that it's something much more contemporary and way less interesting. My schema of the building gets messed. Also, my self-schema gets slightly messed because I'm like, crap, I'm supposed to be a Baroque enthusiast. I don't even know where the Baroque buildings are. Not doing my research enough. Yes, clearly it affects my action. So the gap is the intention action gap, but the cognitive dissonance there is affecting intentions becoming actions, or changing how it goes, basically.
So it sounds like it's the context of the kind of intention, or it's sort of they're relate, maybe in a situation where it's related but not the same. Where if you have, like, for the knowledge, positive self schema is, oh well, I'm a Baroque building enthusiast, and then now that yeah, that filling that gap in your knowledge, like
Yes,
like you're saying.
I guess what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say is, imagine if the thing went, if the situation turned out to be more positive than you expected. You expected to find a Baroque building,
Mhm.
but you found like a piece of classical, like epic Baroque architecture in Nordic Europe. It's not just any Baroque building, it's like the first building by a great Baroque architect or something.
Mhm.
There again, you have your actions may change. You may say, now I'll study this for 2 days. You see, but you don't have cognitive dissonance. Your knowledge, your belief in yourself, your positive self-schema is reinforced in that situation. You don't have cognitive dissonance. You say, wow, amazing. This turned out to be an even better building than I thought. So well done, man. I'm doing something right about my research.
Okay.
You see, intention and
then-
actions, it can go either ways. that dynamic, I mean.
Yeah, so it depends. Taking that same situation, I guess it depends if you're going into it thinking, believing, oh, I'm an expert on Baroque buildings, and I know everything there is to know. Then going to find that building would be dissonance of
it not following through. Yes, if it didn't come through on your expectations, then you'd have a clash between what you believed and the fact. What you found. But if it only reinforces what you believe, then you don't have dissonance. You're feeling great.
Yeah.
But the action intention gap clearly refers to having an intention which you're not able to act upon. So that's what they're trying to focus on that. Why do we set intentions that we do not execute? Especially, and most of them are in this positive intention space, things like making your life healthier, wealthier, more productive, etc.
So it depends on your mindset going into it, or your beliefs, determine what the results are, it seems.
Yeah, as soon as you take a belief view, I think you get into cognitive dissonance territory. Remember that cognitive science is in fact the study of things like beliefs, things like that. But yeah, these are very, very, very closely related. Great conversation.
I had a kind of question / thought about cognitive dissonance.
Sure, Tom.
Does it have to be like somewhat like uncomfortable as a sort of psychological experience, or?
Always. Dissonance, the whole point about the word dissonance is disharmony, the opposite of consonance. You're experiencing a psychological discomfort there, which you are seeking to relieve.
So if I go to, like, let's say a lecture on behavior design and I learn something new that's not like matching my sort of schema about behavior design, then that addition of knowledge, that's not cognitive dissonance necessarily?
It depends on the elements there, right? If you believed when you went for the lecture that I am a novice and I don't know everything, and then you learned something new, then you would be in consonance and you would say, my belief that I'm a novice, or my belief that I can learn a lot more, and the fact that I learned something more, they are consonant. But if you went to the lecture believing that I cannot learn anything new, I already know everything there is to know, and then you learn something new, then you're in dissonance. Discomfort, which you have to resolve. So that's why those elements there are super important. What was the belief? What was the attitude? What was the value? What was the knowledge? And what behavior did one do or not do? That creates and that's why you have to change one of them. The moment you're in dissonance, you can't stay in that uncomfortable state. So you tinker one of them and change them. The easiest thing to change is something internal. You can't change facts. You can't change the building, you can't change the class, but you can tell yourself something else. So that's typically what we do, is we change something internal first and come back to some, I feel better about myself now. Crazy theory, applies to everything.
Yeah. And just
Pretty
to
solid
summarize,
stuff.
yeah. And just to, I think, solidify and make concrete what we've been talking about, and the relation to the intention action gap, cognitive dissonance, that if you could have an intention that they have the intention action gap and not feel bad about it. Have an intention and
Not do
you
the
don't
action.
follow through with that because of something outside your control, like, and not feel bad about it. Like, oh, okay, well, I had this intention, it got thrown off. You know, this happened. I was tired. I guess my body needed to sleep. I couldn't wake up earlier.
Exactly. That's
No-
resolving
no-
the
no
dissonance.
dissonance.
That's
And-
resolving the dissonance, because see, you are having to navigate this dilemma that you did not come through. You know, I think it happens on a very subliminal level. Like, I planned something, I had the intention, I didn't do it. In a microsecond, you can decide why and not stay in that dissonant state. I think that's
Okay.
really important to understand this, because it's a really powerful tool. Why spend time in dissonance, feeling horrible? It's better to resolve it, come to consonance, come to equilibrium, and then dissect post-mortem what happened. And say, well, I couldn't do it in that moment because of these reasons, and that's totally fine, I'm human. But if you remain in dissonance, it's an emotional mess.
So then what's the case then where that happens and you don't have dissonance?
Where your actions and your intentions are not aligned and you don't have dissonance.
Yeah.
Theoretically, it shouldn't be possible theoretically. That's what the theory says, but I think.
Is it like, in my mind, it's somehow like if you've somehow automated that process of like let's say you have like some kind of cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, like you're really skilled at reframing a situation, and it just kind of like goes into this system one kind of thinking that you're just like, oh, okay, I overslept, but you know, I must have been tired or something like that.
But that's my point, Tom. Like, where is the need to reframe it coming from? Where is the but in your sentence coming from? Why are you trying to justify anything? It's coming because you're dissonant with the fact, or you saw the inconsistency between your intention and your action. Even in that microsecond, you're trying to resolve that discrepancy between the two, right? That's the reason you are saying, I will use this frame or that frame, or say this or say that.
So then,
unless we forgot the intention, the only place where it would apply is that you intended something, you just kind of forgot about it, and then you did something else and you didn't see them together. I guess some people can live like that. So denial would be the only place. I think denial is the only answer, where you are actively make choice, intentions, don't follow through them, and then be completely in denial about those moments of intention. Just like live your life. I believe people can do it.
then denial would be a belief or an attitude?
Denial is deeper than that. It's just choosing where to focus in a current moment. It's this amazing ability of focusing on picking what to focus on. So, because by focusing on this, I'm denying everything else. You see? So if a mother is being, or a parent is being unkind to a child, and then saying to the child that you got to toughen up, you know, what they are doing is they're denying the child's needs. They're denying their responsibility. They're denying a lot of things How are they doing it? Because they're focusing on this principle of you need to toughen up. Right? So denial works by basically blind spotting everything else and just picking something that you can conveniently be attached to. You can focus on that. And just by default, everything else is denied. It's very classic of right-wing people who say something like, you know, I'm against abortion because it's, you know, you can't kill God's making. And you just stick to that frame and you say, that's the truth. That's the source of truth. Everything else falls outside that frame. So it doesn't work. It doesn't matter. So denial is very complex. I would say we got into it a little bit. The Truth About Denial is a good book to read. And Motivated Cognition plays in there basically. See, what the guy who's denying pro-choice, who's against pro-choice, someone say who advocates no abortions, for example, they think they're doing a lot of great work. They think they're reasoning this out. The argument is very well reasoned, you know? But it's not reasoning because it's motivated. You've already made up your mind. And then you're reasoning towards something and saying, this is my reason. This is what I believe. And that's so what denial is a lot about what's called motivated cognition. But then denial could come from things like persuasion related. Persuasion goes a lot into the authority, liking, consensus. We want to be liked. We want to subscribe to authority figures. We want to be in consensus with others. So we might make these choices as a result of those forces as well. And deny something. My entire tribe just denies that this tree is a living thing or whatever. Just, you know, anything. And in the space of self-denial, it's endless. Like there's so many factors because it's you inside your own world.
So there's some element of belief behind it then.
I would say so. I think so. I think belief is always at play for sure.
Okay.
Got to believe something.
And now in the well, we should keep going.
No worries. Close zoom.us may help your Mac cool down. Okay. Nice. Yeah, let's keep going. I'll have just a few more. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask a question about this. Sorry, I jumped 2 steps ahead, but I've brought up this example at some point and said, hey, what was this an example of? And I know it's quite specific, but I just wanted to remind you guys once again of this phenomenon called interference. Mental processing is made slower and less accurate by competing mental processes. This is also from design thinking. But a very clear cognitive concept. So always think about like how many choices, how much, what levels of processing, what levels of design, and the 2 systems, all of this stuff to avoid interference. Getting into the next question. Yes. So just a few more questions to go, guys. Which element of decision making is missing here? This is from choice design. You have agents, the actors with agency who make choices on the left. Then you have multiple choices. Then usually make a decision, and that results in do you remember the term?
Is it evaluation?
Not on this model, but I guess the evaluation comes after.
Thinking action, but I don't know.
Actually, that's a good one. Yeah, of course you have to make the action of eating the sushi there. But I had shown the model with a more specific word to choice theory, basically elements of choice. And the word is payoff. So when you're thinking of designing choices, you want to think about the choices. And funnily, that's why, again, choice theory, behavioral economics, these guys don't have that much of, they don't focus that much on the behavior itself. Because if they did, they would have to get into that cognitive thing, which they don't get into. They just talk about choices, decisions, and payoffs. But I think Ines's answer is the great answer, because that's what we should be thinking about there, is how does, I've always said that decisions and actions are not the same thing. Neither are choices and actions. Action design is an entirely separate thing. And that's exactly what we are trying to get into here. But in decision-making science, choice science, typically the payoffs are really important. The payoff is what is the relative value or the perceived value of my decision? Does it meet that? Is it better than I thought, worse than I thought? Is it high value, low value? What is it? And we'd always calculate the payoffs, because people are almost towards the end. We looked at choice design, and we looked at this cool guy giving his talk about automating his life through algorithms. And I said that the future of choice design is between UX and
UI?
not really. The UX and UI would be the same box on the left. but-
Probably a different letter. AI.
Yeah,
AI.
yeah, exactly. AI. That was the point I was trying to make, that, you know, when we think about choices in the digital world and the digital future, it's not just choice designers or UX designers, the design people who are going to, you know, use our skills to help people make better choices. It's also machines. So the other word I was looking for was machine learning or AI. Currently, like now, every machine learning is generally AI. There's very little AI outside that, even though it's early days, there's some work happening, but in general, it's machine learning. So, and this is the real space for us. I mean, this is going to be our space of work for the rest of our lives, basically. And we need to figure out both these. But if we didn't have all that behavioral theory, we wouldn't be very good at the ones on the left, or on the one on the right either. Awesome. So then I just had a bunch of, I think we're done. Then I had just a bunch of like ads to show you and talk about appeals and the 3 persuasive appeals. Does anybody remember them? The 3 classic persuasive appeals from Socrates.
Ethos.
No, sorry, Aristotle.
Ethos, logos. pathos.
Yes, ethos,
Pathos.
logos, and pathos. Yes. And what do they all stand for? Ethos is
Emotional.
Credibility.
yes. Ethos was credibility, and that's like the tricky one. It's not emotions. Pathos is the emotional one.
Yeah.
So think of pathetic, pathos, and what else is the other word? Not tragedy, but what other word can you think of from pathos? Pathetic. There's another word. Anyways, but yeah, pathetic is the only word that comes to mind. And pity, yeah, I think paternal, all of those are, so pathos is the emotional one, and logos is more directly logic. It's logical. And I think we also spoke about the fact that all these 3 appeals usually can be worked. You can blend them in, and ads are really good at doing that, especially when you, this was a good exercise. I was thinking like, Tom, for our balance, would be cool if one exercise could be to create like 4 or 5 different ads. If you only had one page to sell the product, what would you put there? Classic, old school. I think it really helps to refine that value prop. And that could be an exercise we could do as well. But so what would you guys say is what are the emotional appeals working here?
I just don't understand if it's insurance or if it's some kind of investment,
Yeah,
like a fund or whatever.
yeah. It's
It's
something
basically
financial.
risk-free. Yeah.
Is this like an anti-ad or?
I think it's a real ad for some financial services company, something in the ballpark of emotions, or sorry, of insurance.
Well, what was the question?
Which emotional, which appeal, rhetorical appeal or persuasive appeal would be at work here?
I don't know. I guess it's kind of like a combination of pathos and logos for me. Like,
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Like, are you somebody who doesn't really care about this kind of stuff and you just want to maximize your earnings? I don't know.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's the ethical side of it as well. I think there's also some ethos here because it shows that they have this credibility, and I'm sure Jamie was thinking that. Like, you should be very self-assured to make a claim like that, saying, we know our business so well that we'll get you 8.5% no matter what. It's kind of like self-credibility. But it's also got this emotional angle of, yeah, risk and the fear that risk evokes. Clearly has a strong pathos angle. And the logos is anything numerical is usually a logos. You think in terms of numbers and you say, well, 8.5%, you can't go wrong with that. It just logically makes sense because it's a good deal, Cool. How about this one? This one's super tricky. I don't even know why I put this up. Just to mess with you guys. Oh no.
Well, there's the ethos element saying that they make all the tires where of importance. There is other competition, but they're used as bumpers along the raceway.
Exactly. So it again gives me also this very ethos appeal.
And then the pathos part of it is like the emotional reaction, I think, to that. That's you're like,
If you don't have
okay.
Bridgestone.
Oh yeah. You might as well be using your tires trick.
Yeah, I think for me,
Wow.
these are all very powerful examples of nudge thinking in some ways, because they satisfy all the principles. They are like features of my environment. They're not intrusive. They're not forcing a choice on me. You see, persuasion is the fundamental nudge on some levels. Or nudge is a form of persuasion deep down. And if we understand persuasion, we will understand a lot about how to nudge properly, because these are so powerful. But they do kind of mess with your mind a bit. I mean, and this is the fine line, like, are you being manipulative or persuasive? And I guess the question becomes towards what end? What's the goal, I guess, right?
It's actually pretty cool. It's like they're extracting this billion of power or something, and like something rare. I don't know. I like it. But then you look at the car; it's actually very small and cute. So interesting
Yeah,
combo.
exactly. It doesn't really say how the car is gonna help me reveal my dark side, but it is.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is, you're still a teddy bear. You see, the thing is that you might be revealing a little bit of it, but you still have the suit of your persona is still that of a cute person. So that kind of works quite well with the small car. You're a small car driving cute person, but then it's not like you can't be wild or something.
Yeah. I think also design-wise, it's a good job. Like there's the spotlight and the like small palette of colors, really, which seems more credible. Suddenly, it's the same as like Apple website. If you go there, it's all just black with some splashes of color, but it suddenly feels more professional somehow. I think
Good
pretty well done. in that sense.
analysis. Lots of ethos there. Germany and cars already, there's a very strong association, credibility and expertise. Germany and engineering in general, that's part of the brand of the country. And then kind of like this whole reinforcing the safety aspect and reinforcing the public services being really good, etc. And then this brand. It's also a logos element here where you say, yeah, of course it's Germany. They nail it. Of course, these are all perceptions. I'm not making any factual claims here, but move ahead. Reactions. I don't get why it's smart if it can do that. Does it not break down?
Because they are light, and when it's windy, they can get blew away.
Tie your car down. Looks like it's an electric vehicle or something, a battery vehicle. This is kind of, yeah.
Actually, so funny. I just realized looking at this that maybe communicating some concepts like comfort and maybe like family life or whatever, it's really hard to do without people. So say the Fiat had just an animal, But it was a feeling of, I guess, poshness with some kind of cuteness, or some kind of like, you know, that you can kind of combine the contrasts. But I totally cannot imagine how they would show comfort if there were not people sitting in something soft, you know.
Yeah, it's not an easy job for sure.
To me, the emotion I'm feeling is not comfort, but terror. Like, like how is that? I hope someone doesn't lean back too far.
Shit. Yeah. Or lean forward.
Moving forward.
Don't try to tie your shoelaces.
This is
It's somehow, I don't know, I didn't get that feeling of dread because I assume they're even more uncomfortable up there. Somehow seems like an addition, but I must say on reflection, it is a bit, it's a very interesting choice of visual to depict that value proposition. And I don't exactly understand what I mean by interesting in this case. It could be leaning on positive or negative side.
But yeah, it's like
it's very uncomfortable.
Okay, the jury's out.
yeah, like at work. I mean, for the car, I don't know how it's related. I mean,
well, I think what they mean is that you're going to be driving around so much that you but you're just so much more comfortable and safer even in a basic car on the ground than you are in a couch in the sky. Anyways,
yeah, like I feel okay. It feels like it's an example of, you know, they're trying to communicate so much. I mean, they kind of have to go. I mean, these are all such like extremes. There has to be like novelty, something shocking when you see it, and then connect it back to the product, you know, they're trying to sell.
That's very true. Who knows? Some you visualize an art director will come up with that idea and totally sold it to the client first, and the client's like, "Yeah, I want that visual."
Mm-hmm. But you know? right. Pass
that's so catchy. That'll grab the guys.
Yeah. And like, how much did this help them sell their cars? Like we're trying to connect the threads, like how, you know, thinking about it so much to, you know, system 2 to connect. All right, this is comfort for your cars driving on the ground, but up top, but you're comfortable and work, you know, to like make sense of it. And it's not, well, and no, and unless you're breaking it down, the advertisement isn't connecting that. It's all a very, you got a quick impression.
Yes.
System 1 thinking.
Indeed. Very system 1, indeed. And then system 2 is just totally flipping all over the place, like what's going on? I don't know how to translate that into a buying decision. This I thought was funny. Could as well be a he or a they, but
is this like Corona joke or?
So many, like this is interesting because actually the stuff that people that AI and natural language processing specifically in AI is starting to figure out is that humans are so extremely great at understanding context and conceptual metaphors and implications and what's implied, what's not implied. And just that one statement, those 2 statements, she's cough, just a friend, and like, make sure good news sounds like good news. If you fed that to an AI algorithm, it wouldn't make head or tail out of it. It wouldn't have any understanding of why those 2 are related. But we can read so much meaning into that, right? And we can tie those 2 sentences together. And your mind is thinking of all these different things of like good news and who's the speaker, what's the context, what's going on. And I think that's where the whole UX or human-made design and AI, you need to be able to combine them because AI cannot do this. They can't be creative like this, not yet at least. Speaking of which, I have been testing GPT-3, the natural language processing AI from OpenAI, with the help of a friend, and I asked it some queries, and it sent me some interesting replies. So I need to post all of those on the Slack, but remind me to do that. And it's getting very interesting what the most advanced AI in the world is able to do right now when it comes to natural language, and harnessing that stuff and building on top of that or with that is going to be really exactly where the gold standard is. Anyways, just thought I'd end with this more just to make this point about the AI thingy. So yeah, that was that. Hopefully that just refreshed some of the key concepts that we spoke about in this entire course so far. But there's easily another 10 or 12 questions that I had in mind, which I wanted to add, which I didn't add because I knew it would be too much. But it gives you a sample of some of the key things. And I guess my takeaway from this is that I could just go ahead and do class 10 as I was thinking about it, basically. So if there's any specific aspects of any topic that in reflection you would want me to discuss while designing nudges, then, because the class designing nudges is just basically designing behavioral interventions. So it applies to all of behavior design. And it's a practice class where we can apply theory, but nudge theory as well. So if there's anything you'd like me to bring out, the next class we'll basically I'll set up a few scenarios or examples and have you guys take a crack at them. A lot like today, but more problem focused. And then we'll get into personality and diversity, or diversity is 11, and then finally the scale stuff. Or I could do those two classes and then I could do the designing interventions class at the very end.
I don't know about everyone else. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that would be nice to end on some kind of practical stuff. For me, I think that would be useful. Like even this, just repeating theory is super useful, because for me, theory alone just doesn't stick around that well. So if it could be somehow applied, and if there could be some kind of guided practical method or tools even, like that would be super awesome. So we can take away something very practical from the course as well.
Yeah.
And I was going to add to that. Also, I mean, that is such, I guess, an important thing, the practicality, the practice implementation for learning it, internalizing it. Also, my first reaction was, well, why wait until the end to do that, to put it all together? Like, doing the practical piece of it would be very helpful. Like, let's learn it now and then and do it, at the end also, to like tie all the pieces together. Sort of, yeah. Well, anyway.
Yeah.
Sort of
the
like
thing
this
is that
very
the problem with the practical so far has been that I've basically been trying to offload that to you as homework, so that I can use the classes to cover as much theoretical ground as possible, so that each topic is touched upon with some depth, because you are committing 2 hours to it. And if I didn't touch some of these concepts that I didn't touch today, you would have worked with the others, but you wouldn't get this sort of more meta idea about how these things link together. That's been my dilemma as a designer. It's actually much easier for me to design a theoretical class than it is a practical class, because I just have to come up with a problem. I can take a screenshot right now from Zoom and say, how would you better present the panels of who are participating? Is there a better way to design it? Or anything. There's problems, design problems are everywhere, especially in the digital world. And I have dozens and dozens of ideas and screenshots. But the moment we get into that question of how would you design these panels better, you get into a theoretical problem, which is, Are you talking about architecting choices? Are you talking about perception? Are you talking about cognition? What on earth are you talking about? So we don't have a common language from where to enter practice. We don't have much to go on. It just becomes guesswork. It becomes like, I think we should put it on the top left and the icons should be smaller Y, right? So that's been the challenge of the course for me as a designer. And I've been trying to bring it to a point where we have enough language to do some solid cracking. And very happy, that's why I'm thinking we can have all the next 3 classes, half and half. That might be a good solution, right, Sia, to kind of say like half and half strictly next 3 classes. The final class, see, let me suggest this. The final class can be entirely practice. The next class, we can do diversity and personality. And the final class, we can do behavioral data science and AI, but only 1 hour each. And the 1 hour each in those classes, we can do practice. And the final class, we can do fully practice. And I can give you homework if you'd like to do some group work together also. But I totally accept that the homework, it's not always easy to do. And I was not expecting from, everyone to finish everything, because you do have tons of other things to do outside this course. So I'm not complaining about that, but that was my intention in terms of the design originally.
Yeah, I think just maybe some feedback, but maybe some of the design could be sending the lectures for us to listen to as homework, and then like trying to discuss and apply those things when we're together as a group.
I have thought about this as a reflection from this course.
Or like the other thing is because I understand the problem is like, in order for us to apply it, like we have to know it first.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe maybe split the content into smaller courses and focus in on like very specific aspects, so that we can learn a little bit and then have more time to like focus on applying it. So
But
maybe there's
totally.
just too much content.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. That's again, I think that's a personal thing. Someone might say, hey, I really was benefited by all this theory and I wanted all of it. That's what I came to the course for. So honestly, you hit it on the head, because I have been obviously thinking about further iterations of the product, and getting all these ideas into a course which actually made sense was my first intention, was my first goal, because I wanted to see if all this could be communicated and communicated in a cohesive way, in an interconnected way. And it seems like it can. One of the ways to solve theory problems here, the practice problems here, is of course the continuation of the Slack channel, right? And the fact that you can use that as a community to bring up problems in those specific channels and solve them there. And I think that's going to be that's the real answer to it, because there is no way anyone can pick up all these concepts and start being a whiz at cracking, using them in applied settings. The best way is going to be to bring up a problem that you find and throw it up there and let people figure it out together, what's happening. How do you use the theory on that? But totally, I get Katie's choice and Katie's point, and I know I had to take a choice. So this was the choice I made about current product. I think Philip's done.
Yeah. And last point on this.
No worries.
Also, I think that today was a really good exercise and really revealing, I think, for how much was lost. I mean, of how much we've gone through and how much was kind of just faded away like sort of depended on each other. Everyone, you know, like hopefully someone had, you know, one piece or another, and we were just kind of like struggling, I'd say, a bit to like push things together, like overall, just
Okay.
from, you know, the sheer amount of content. And, you know, some people like latched on to some pieces and other, and so so anyway, I don't know
Yeah.
if you had a different takeaway
Cool.
from that, but it
I'll
was good.
let's do a lot more. Let's do a lot more practice in the next 3 classes. That's my main takeaway. I'll bring in the core theory that I wanted to bring in for the next 2 classes. So those subjects are addressed. Then I will, you know, design some nice exercises for you guys to crack those on. That's great feedback. That's exactly what I needed, basically. And anything else, let's take it on to Slack. People are really getting right at the end of their, thanks for staying on, guys. It's half an hour more of your time, but get some rest and let's rock on. See you in the near future. Enjoy summer.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Ash.
you.
Bye.
Thank you for today.
Thank
Really
you.
good
You
class.
guys.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.